Today we're going to talk about the BMW M Coupe, but not this BMW M Coupe. No, we're going to look at this car, a 2006 BMW Z4 M Coupe in Interlagos Blue, and this one is gorgeous. It's yet another one I bought by accident on Bring a Trailer when my wife went away on vacation. We're not going to talk a lot about this car today. What we're going to do is take both M Coupes out for a drive. It's really not very often that you see these two cars together, and it's really not very often you see this car at all. I can only ever remember seeing one other of these on the road. Very, very rare, much more rare than the Clown Shoe. So without faffing around anymore, let's take these cars out for a ride. Here I am in the original M Coupe, the Z4 M Coupe. This is a 2000 model, so it has the less desirable S52 engine, but it's still a great car. And the first thing you notice when you get in it is these beautiful center gauges, and they just, it's such a good look for the car, and it's very classic. A lot of hard plastics, and really unique upholstery in this car. This one has the blue and black seats, which are definitely an acquired taste, and you feel like you're sitting up very high in this car. It's a very upright seating position. It's a very high greenhouse, so there's a lot of glass in this car, and particularly with the sunroof. Most of the M Coupes came with the sunroof option, so people actually are willing sometimes to pay more for one with the sunroof delete just because of their rarity. But because of all the glass, the sunroof, it can get very hot in here in the summer, but it's a very airy cabin and a very comfortable cabin. Now, as I said, this one has the S52 engine, which still produces a fair amount of power. It's 240 horsepower, which was a lot in its day, and it's definitely no slouch. I've had this car out on the racetrack, and it's a lot of fun. And I've just noticed that I've got the sun shining directly in the lens on this camera, so hopefully it's not too bad. So yes, I've had this car on the racetrack, and this one's had suspension modifications, so it's got coilovers, it's been lowered, so the stance is really, really good. This is how the car should have looked, in my opinion, straight from the showroom. It does present a little bit of a problem getting in and out of my driveway, because I have a very steep driveway, and I've scraped it more than once trying to get in the driveway. Despite being a two-seater sports car, it's actually pretty practical. There's plenty of room in the back, and you can see the netting there between the storage area and the cabin, so that means that anything you put in the back isn't going to join you in the front under spirited braking. It also means there's plenty of room for Natasha, the black Labrador. She can sit back there quite comfortably and not feel cramped, and she's very comfortable back there. And when you put your foot down, this car, you can feel how hard the suspension is. When you put your foot down, this car really goes. And I would say with the settings that we've got on the suspension at the moment, it's probably a little too harsh. But it's not uncomfortable to drive, and this engine has plenty of poke. And one of the benefits of the S52 engine is that it's not highly stressed. This engine is the definition of bulletproof. It's silky smooth. It's not that economical, but I don't think you buy this type of car for economics. I love this car. It's such a nice car to be in. It looks very, very polarizing. And it got the nickname the Clown Shoe because it actually looks like a clown shoe. It's also been referred to as the bread fan. I remember the first time I saw this car in the showroom in Montreal in the year 2000. It just struck me as being a fantastic design, and I think it's lasted well throughout the years. I mean, it's got these big, powerful haunches in the rear, and a lot of the metalwork is shared with the Roadster. And if you look at the non-M Coupe, all the body panels are exactly the same, so that it's not differentiated from the standard model. And a lot of that was to do with cost saving. I mean, this car was built as some people say it was a secret project, but it was an engineering project where the engineering team felt that the Roadster really wasn't a very good car because it didn't have a very stiff chassis. So they set out to build a stiffer, better sports car, and this was the result. They put a roof on it, tried to figure out how to make it look half decent, and produce a car that was 2.8 times stiffer than the Roadster. And it really shows on the road. You don't feel a lot of the scuttle shake that you get with the Roadster, and on the track it's a lot of fun to drive. This is a very tossable car, and it's got a limited slip differential, fabulous brakes. So I bought this car a couple of years ago on Bring a Trailer, and I really don't regret it. It had 78,000 miles on it, a few dings and a few problems, but that meant that I wasn't that worried about driving it. This one definitely isn't a trailer queen. I used it as my daily driver. That was until I got the Z4 M Coupe. I missed my road, that's why we've just turned around like that. Yes, this was my daily driver until I picked up the Z4 M Coupe, and that has now become my daily driver, and this one is for special occasions. But anytime you get in this car, it's a special occasion. I love it. The engine just makes a beautiful noise. It's so smooth, and when you put your foot down, it really, really goes. This one has a sharp tune on it. I'm not sure if that adds any power or torque, but it increases the red line to 7,000 RPM. I think from the factory this came with a 6,500 RPM red line. So I haven't driven it without the tune in it, but it certainly is extremely responsive, a lot of fun to drive, and it doesn't feel like a car that is 21 years old. I've just jumped out of the original M Coupe into this, the Z4 M Coupe, and immediately when you get in this one, you feel like you're sitting much lower, and it's a much more sporty driving position. You feel like you're sitting in this car, whereas in the other one you feel more like you're sitting on the car. The steering wheel as well it's a lot fatter, and it feels really comfortable, and it's a smaller steering wheel. It's a very large wheel on the other car. This car it feels a lot heavier, but it isn't. It's about 100 pounds heavier than the original, but it feels a lot more solidly put together. Now this one actually has 170,000 miles on it now, so it's seen a lot more mileage than the other one, but it still feels way more solid. There are less bumps and rattles, and it just feels extremely well put together. Now this one has the venerable S54 engine, and what an engine it is. I always said, as as probably most S52 owners say, there's not that much difference, it's just at the top end, so driving around town it doesn't make any difference. Having driven both of these cars, I can tell you it makes a huge difference, even driving around town. This one has 330 horsepower versus 240 for the original M Coupe. But it's not just the horsepower, it's the torque. And it doesn't seem like there's a huge difference in the torque. It's 262 for this one versus 238, I think it is. You heard how hard the suspension is there. I think it's 238 for the original, but it's how that torque is delivered. The torque curve for this car is virtually flat all the way through the RPM range, so that torque is available anywhere you need it, all the way up to a red line of 8,000 RPM. The torque curve for the original M Coupe peaks fairly early in the rev range, which is good, but then it tails off as you go, and I've actually included a comparison of the torque curves between the two engines so you can see the difference. So that torque delivery is what makes all the difference, and when we were driving these together with my son, it didn't matter who was driving what. Whoever was in the original M Coupe had difficulty keeping up with this car. This is a fast car. 0 to 60 wasn't fantastic. It was a smidge under 5 seconds. I think it was 4.9 seconds. But it's a beast, and on track it is fantastic. It had a reputation for understeering, but with judicious use of the right foot, you can make this thing oversteer all day. It is so much fun. The one criticism I would say for it is that it is an extremely harsh ride for daily driving. It is not the most comfortable of cars, and that was the major criticism of it in its day when it was sold, and they really didn't sell many of these. This car is actually a lot rarer than the original M Coupe. North America, there were 1,815 of these made versus 2,800 or so of the M Coupe. I will always call that other car the M Coupe, even though this is the M Coupe as well. This is the Z4 M Coupe. So this is an extremely rare car, and I can only ever recall seeing one other of these on the road. So you really, if you have one of these, you're probably not going to see another one unless you belong to a Z4. Oh, that is just so harsh. Unless you belong to a Z4 M Coupe owners club, if such a thing exists. I will say these seats they're supportive, but they're not hugely comfortable. These are the M Sport seats, so they feel very thin, and I think the driver's seat is suffering from old age. As I said, I've got 170,000 miles on this car, and I think this seat has been sat in a lot, which means this car has been used how it was meant to be used. It's been driven. The styling is not as controversial as the first one, which is probably why it isn't as loved as the first one. It actually reminds me a lot of the old Triumph GT6. But one of the consequences of the styling, because it's got the slope back, is even though you've got the hatch in the back, there isn't the same kind of room as there is in the original, which means the dog really is not comfortable in the back, and I would not put her in there for any length of time because her head hits the glass. But is the operative word. This car is victim of the famous bangle butt, but I think it works well on this car, and I actually found that you can get 2 tyres in the back of this car fairly comfortably. There's not many sports cars you could say you can do that. In its day, the competition was was a lot more expensive, if I remember correctly, and in all the comparison tests, the Porsche won out handily. Its handling, and I've driven one of those as well, the handling is sublime. This was more raw and visceral and grab you by the scruff of the neck driving, whereas the Porsche is precision and scalpel-like, and actually a lot easier to drive. So it wasn't a huge hit with the critics, and I think that's a shame. I think it's a great car. Everybody should drive one of these, and this one still feels like it's brand new. It is extremely solid. As I mentioned, there are no creaks and rattles. You feel every single bump in it. But I think that's the point of this car. This one is Interlagos Blue, which they used for all the marketing and the press releases, and it just looks fabulous in this colour. The interior is a very subdued black, very typical of the early BMWs. Very businesslike. It's got a carbon effect leather dash. It's just all business. It's not quite as special as the original with those beautiful dials, but it says it's here to be driven, not to be enjoyed for all the frills that are inside, which is just as well because there are very few frills here. It's very driver focused in this car, and it's difficult to choose between the two of them. It's like being asked to choose between your children. They're different, and I love them both for extremely different reasons. At the moment, I choose to use this one on a daily basis, and the other one is put away safely under wraps. Next month, I will probably switch them over, and that's the great thing about having both of them. I feel extremely privileged to own both of these cars, and seeing them on the road together is a very, very unusual sight. So that's that. That was just a quick look and comparison of these two unusual and quirky BMW sports cars. This is when BMW used to make really good cars and really good drivers' cars. And hopefully I get to hold on to these for many years to come.